Okay, good afternoon. I just want to welcome you all to the press conference here today. This is being hosted and facilitated by Onion Lake Cree Nation. We have several media outlets in attendance. We'd like to thank you for coming and attending the court proceeding over the past couple days. I mentioned that we're going to start off with Ochapowace Fox from Onion Lake Cree Nation, and then we're going to move to Chief Margaret Bear and Chief Wapas if he joins us, and then we'll end off with the National Chief Perry Belgar, and then we'll field questions from the media after that.
Good afternoon to the media, to the elders and chiefs that are here. And understand this is on live stream also, and to Gakio Gantuk to make Skat no Gakio Mamohta and Mawihone. I have had to say this in Cree, our language, as advised by our own people a long time ago, to always acknowledge the Creator. Today, this press conference, and I'm not going to read from this. We are here to answer or try to attempt to raise awareness and understanding of what this court is about. A number of legalities, legal issues. It's unconstitutional. There was no consultation with our First Nation in regards to C27. We attempted to appear before the standing committee. We were unsuccessful when this was being discussed. I want to speak of this, and I commend the chief, national chief, for being here, and the other chiefs also. Welcome. First of all, to the media. I'm going to say this. I'm not reading from any script. Please write what is being said. I said this to one of the reporters the other day, that each and every time something negative happens in First Nation, it hits front page all across this land. There are many wonderful things that are being done in First Nations territory. As you've heard from the court, both from our lawyers, our defense, and both from the Crown, Onion Lake has been transparent all along. We have a 3-day to 4-day session every March presenting our budgets to our membership for those that are in attendance, that have interest to be in attendance. 3 days, line by line, the federal government contribution dollars. And on this side, our own source revenue. Our chief and council salaries are a part of this. Now one must ask themselves, is this legislation about chief and council salaries, or is it about transparency? If it is about transparency and accountability, we've done that in our community. Our position is all along the consolidated, and I say this, unqualified audit means there is no problems in financial accountability and administration. Onion Lake has always had those. And those consolidated audits have always been provided to the Department of Indian Affairs and to our people that have access and open door policy to our membership in our office if they want to see these documents. We present them at a general meeting in our community. We go through the questions and answers. I challenge Minister Valcourt, and before I say this, when our own source revenue is presented, all the directors and managers have to present their budget asking our membership to use our own source revenue. And they go line by line, and many of the elders are here that have been in those meetings. And at the end, we ask our people that are in attendance, do you support this? And if it's yes, we go ahead and access our own source money, our resources. Because what Indian Affairs provides to all First Nations is never adequate. Never adequate. I've been around for 30+ years. The housing subsidy that is in the Indian Affairs budget is the same as it was in 1983 when I entered politics, the same amount. Meanwhile, the demands and the people and the population increases in every First Nation. I challenged Minister Valcourt on a number of meetings. Do you, Mr. Minister, go back to your constituents when you're going to vote on Parliament budget in the House? Do you go back to your constituents and ask them, line by line, before you vote? The answer is no. Now, who's accountable and who's transparent? And what is the difference between your government and my government? That is the difference. In the treaty, to the media and to the public, it takes two sovereign entities to enter into a treaty. Our ancestors entered into treaty. Treaty 1 to 11 and the pre-numbered treaties. Before Treaty 1 was entered into, Confederation, no one was allowed to come out to the west, because in the Royal Proclamation of 1763, this was recognized as the Red Indian. This is their territory. The Royal Proclamation said no one may enter that. When the first Prime Minister went overseas 3 times to say to the Queen and to the King, I would like that under the Dominion of Canada. It was then called Rupert's Land. On the 3rd trip, and it's recorded in their archives and their documents and their records, they provided royal consent to come and enter into treaty with our people. That is the only way my subjects can enter that land. And number 2, you must provide fair, equitable compensation to the Red Indian for their land. They entered into treaty, they never provided fair, equitable compensation. This is how important the treaty is today. There would be no provinces today if it was not for the treaty process. People need to understand this. If the treaty is not important, why does the minister send his bureaucrats to every First Nation every year with the red coat and provide that $5 to the people? The red serge is very important. This uniform was given to recognize that there is a chief under this treaty with the crown, symbols as buttons. That is why I wear this today. Every 3 years, there's triennial clothing provided to the chief and headmen of every nation. That's where this came from. They still do that. The $5 that was given is given every year. It's from the benevolence of the Queen. It is not treaty annuity. It's a gift to honor that there is a treaty that exists. This has been ongoing. So this is how Canada, when they took the Constitution in 1982, they inherited that responsibility. That's why it says the crown and right of Canada. Now, I've said this over the years to many different forums. The Governor General is the one that is responsible, was the right-hand man, the Queen's representative in the treaty-making process. In our case, in Treaty 6 is with Alexander Morris. What you have and what the Queen is promising is over and above what you have. The sovereigns of our people at the time entered into treaty with the Crown. Canada was not there. There was no province at that time. This is the sacred relationship of treaty. In September of 9, in Fort Pitt, they entered into treaty in our area. August, they did it in Fort Carleton. In August 1876, they created an Indian Act, which is why we're standing here today. Nobody was told in Fort Pitt, by the way, this treaty that you entered into, We have an Indian Act over here that's going to erode everything, all the promises that were done. And of course, we all know the history of the assimilation process from that time. The residential school, the pass system, the permit system, all came from that Indian Act. That was not agreed to by treaty. If treaty were not important, they would not come to the reservation every year. And they instituted and enacted all these laws. Even though this federal government today has a majority government member of parliament, also the Senate, any laws that have been enacted need royal consent by the Governor General, or they are not law. The same with your premier, and I say your premier, in this province. They can pass laws in their legislative process, but they need the lieutenant governor to sign, validating that they are laws of the province today. That's the same process of that Crown relationship in Canada and also in the province. I say this, when it's going to be recorded, when it's going to be posted in the media, I doubt it very much. What you hear for that story, how much does the chief make? That's what you're here for. We've disclosed that to our people in our community because those people elected our council and myself. We're accountable to those people. The Indian money came from the land that was sold to the European, to the newcomer. Our lawyer brought that up. The affidavit that was presented by the Deputy Minister Stevenson affirmed that this is Indian money. It is not public taxpayers' money. That's what his affidavit, and many of you that in the media heard that yesterday and today. This is what our elders have been saying all along. The essential money and non-essential that's being discussed, when it leaves Treasury Board, there is no definition. It is called Indian money to Indian affairs to administer. It is the bureaucracy within the government that distinguishes that essential and non-essential. It goes back to the time of residential school. If your child is of age and not going to school, we cut off your rations or we'll put you in the stockade. This is 2015, people. This is happening still today. If Chief and Council doesn't sign this funding agreement, you don't get money. I first heard this when I was 21 years old on council. What happens if we don't sign this funding agreement? You don't get money, is what the Indian Affairs District Manager told me. That's how they've been manipulating and controlling all our people. Because that's all they have to rely on, is that funding. Despite this vast land and the riches that the rest of Canada enjoys, and our people have to live with what the means they have. We could not challenge anything at that time. We could not challenge the government when the 1930 resource. Why? Because we were not allowed to have legal representation till the 1960s. Go figure. When all of Canada can use a lawyer, we were not allowed to, by that infamous Indian Act. This is one of the reasons why we're here today. I am, is to ensure that the message goes out to the public, and I'm very glad that it's live streamed. We never relinquished our sovereign position. We were sovereign entity then and now. One of the deputy ministers on 2 occasions I met said treaty trumps Canadian law. He no longer is department deputy minister because treaty trumps Canadian law. That's still what our elders believe, that's what I believe. We had to go into this foreign court to make a statement of claim against the Governor General and the Minister of Indian Affairs. Enough is enough. We have to stand for our rights. Silence is deemed for acceptance. We're no longer going to be silent. I said to Minister Valcourt a number of times, he called for a meeting and I went with my Director of Operation in his office in Ottawa. Get this, media that is out there. When C27 was being contemplated, being read in the House. You know Onion Lake's history. You know the financial accountability. This is what he said in our meeting. Chief, we have no problem with Onion Lake. You are one of the top 20 First Nations in Canada that has financial accountability, transparency, governance. You are one of the top 20. Then why are you painting us with the same brush? Let us work with you of those top 20 to help other First Nations. We've gone through many of those. That never went anywhere. That was before C27 came into existence. This legislation, no other race in Canada has to do this except Indian people. The privacy legislation that each and every one of you enjoy in Canada protects all of you except Indian people. This is what the legislation does. Bill C27. It's race-based in our opinion. Everyone is protected except our people. They have no legal right to do what they've done, so they created this law. So the Governor General provided assent to that. That's the injustice on many of the past legislations that have been impacting our people. And we, in Onion Lake, in Treaty 6, along with the other nations, are standing firm today. A year ago when we did this, 2 years ago when we did this, presented this information to our membership. Today there's 253 First Nations across this land that have not posted their audits. Now what is the federal government going to do with those people? Are they going to do what they've done to us? The funding that they're holding is sitting in abeyance in the Department of Indian Affairs. And they can't give it back to Treasury Board because it was earmarked and identified in the federal appropriation to Indian Affairs for Onion Lake people. The Indian money. They're holding it. You give us your audit so we can post it, we'll give you this money. Now, how many of you would do that? How many people in Canada would do that? When the private corporations and public companies are not subject to this legislation, municipalities are not subject to this, only the Indian people. So I wanted to say those. We are Indigenous people to this land. We were the first people of this land. Yet we're the one being subjugated to go into a foreign court. We have no recourse to do that. But many people do not understand the role and who's in control in Canada. It's the Governor General of Canada. This is not an independent country. At the United Nations, it is still considered a state. And Canada, when they make their presentation, the state is what they call themselves at the UN. So it's not a country. It's a part of the British colony. State, the British colony. Again, I thank each and every one of you for being here. I don't do this for me. This is for those children that our elders have been talking about for years. If we don't try and make a stand, what then? Will we wonder the next 40, 50 years what happened? Maybe we could have done something at that time. This needs to be done. There's momentum and support that tells you there's 253 First Nations ready, perhaps, to make a similar stand. So I thank each and every one of you for being here. I thank the Creator, thank our elders for being here, our staff and the chiefs, my colleagues and the national chief. May Creator bless each and every one of you people here, all our people. We need the same help. We need to make that stand. Our elders pray for that unity, and hopefully this will achieve that. It's demonstrating already by those 253 nations saying we're not going to post our audit publicly. We have no problem sharing that information with the people of Onion Lake. That's the difference here. To our learned friends here, the media, you didn't elect me, so I'm not responsible to you, right? It's the people at home that I'm accountable to. That's the difference here. And I leave you with this. I've said this to many non-Aboriginal organizations. Have each and every one of you that pay tax, you ever asked your member of parliament, what happened? Could I get a detailed breakdown of the taxes that I pay every year? Do you know where your money goes? Are they accountable to you? We have to do that to our people because we want to. At home, we're accountable. But it stops here today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Baer, Ochapowace Square, Ochapowace Nation. Thank you for the opportunity to address the matters that are now before the Canadian Federal Court. These matters are of particular interest to our government and our nation. These issues and developments advanced by the federal government prejudice and negatively affect our permanent sovereignty, Indigenous peoples' rights, and treaty. It is rather clear that the federal court and indeed the federal government are intent on absolute evading the truth to treaty law, treaty relationships, and treaty duty. Moreover, the issue of evading their own legal duty of consultation before any legislation was contemplated, developed and implemented has been identified as absent and deliberately evaded, all with the effect of avoiding any and all pre-existing treaties, treaty law, sovereignty, and consent standards possess as Indigenous peoples. Combined with our sovereignty and international law concerning our treaty, we have rejected Canadian legislation and policy, in particular Bill C27 and C51. Legislation and policy that perpetuates and continues marginalization, termination, and genocide is at the heart of these Canadian laws. All current legislation, as it has evolved and implemented, is intended to exterminate our natural identities, laws, inherent rights, treaty, and connection to our lands and resources. The Ochapowace Nation possesses a treaty with the Crown of Great Britain, and according to international legal opinion, that forms the basis of our fundamental belief, quote, a party to treaty cannot invoke the provisions of its internal law to justify its failures of performing a treaty, unquote. Canada, in invoking its internal law, has breached international treaty law and has willfully broken our treaty. Ochapowace Nation is of the firm belief that the federal government possesses a moral and legal duty to honor its obligations of our treaty accordingly in precedent-setting manner. The British court stated specifically, quote, no parliament shall do anything to lessen the worth of these guarantees. They should be honored by the Crown in respect of Canada as long as the sun rises and the rivers flow. The promise must never be broken, unquote. In Canada's dealings with the Indigenous peoples throughout the land, we are still awaiting justice and positive action to support those words. Lieutenant Governor Alexander Morris, in the Treaty Number 4 written record, stated the assurances provided by the treaty commissioners and indicated that quote, the Queen always keeps her word, always protects her redhead, unquote. Further still, during the negotiations of Treaty 4 on September the 12th, 1874, the Queen's Commissioner, Alexander Morris, declared to all the Indigenous nations in attendance and to his entourage, quote, the Queen has to think of what will come long after today. Therefore, promises we have to make to you are not for today only, but for tomorrow. Not only for you, but for the children born and unborn. And the promises we make will be carried out as long as the sun shines above the water flows in the ocean, unquote. These solemn words serve as reminders of what promised and what was understood to occur and continue to the definition of the, quote, honor of the Crown, unquote, and are now evinced here for the record, undertaking, and maintenance. Moreover, our treaties are international instruments, as elaborated by the United Nations Study on Treaties, which provides observations, conclusions, and recommendations that clearly and with authority states evidence which supports the international status of our treaties. With this in mind, the application of international treaty law and dispute resolution mechanisms ensures that the best solutions for implementing and enforcing treaty of equal value is the application of true reconciliation. Reconciliation is not a one-sided relationship, as indicative of the constant onslaught of breaches of rights and treaty committed by Canada. True reconciliation means a two-way relationship of equals, where Canada must reconcile our existence, rights, and treaty into their legislation, laws, and ideologies. To settle for anything else would indeed perpetuate crimes of genocide on the original peoples who are the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, which is known as North America, which Ochapowace Nation is an integral and critical part of. Concerning the blatant reckless actions of the Canadian government to deny, derogate, and breach treaty, and to commit condemnable acts of genocide, assimilation, extermination on our people, I therefore formally state that the Government of Canada has abandoned and breached its fiduciary trust and fiduciary responsibility in its pursuit of developing legislation, laws, and policies. In that matter, we have been threatened with a take it or starve ultimatum. A 17th, 18th, and 19th century tactic to make the indigenous peoples surrender and comply. In that context, we have rejected outright your Canadian government's development and application of those obvious ill-intended acts. We are not interested in any offers that compromise, destroy, or eliminate our legitimate inherent rights, nor are we interested in the related sanctions that your government have placed on numerous original treaty nations throughout the land, and which Canada has threatened us with. We condemn and denounce your government's genocidal treatment of the Ochapowace Nation on our livelihoods and existence through the continued and unrelenting acts of assimilation and extermination. Finally, I respectfully state that the Ochapowace Nation is interested in a nation-to-nation relationship. We want our indigenous people's rights to be honored and implemented. We are dedicated to a mutually beneficial coexistence according to our treaty. Canada needs to step up and honor its commitments and obligations accordingly, instead of being adversarial, neglectful, and belligerent. With that, I thank you for listening. Hi. Thank you.
Okay, friends and relatives, some few comments as well. On behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, very glad to be here and honored to be here with my colleagues to support the chiefs in their struggle. And I want to acknowledge some of the regional chiefs that are behind me for sure. Chief Shane Godfredson from British Columbia, Chief Kevin Hart from Manitoba, and of course Chief Kim Jonathan from Saskatchewan, the FSIN. But as well, Chief Mike Smith was here yesterday. He's from the Yukon. And as well, Chief Billy Rasmus from the Northwest Territories. And we wanted to demonstrate our support from the Assembly of First Nations for what Chief Fox is doing, Chief Margaret Bear, Chief Wapas, and of course the other chiefs from Alberta, Chief Twin and Chief Alan Adam. And it basically comes down to a number of points I want to make. When you have bad law or legislation that doesn't respect inherent rights or treaty rights or Section 35 of Canada's own constitution, you need to challenge it and it needs to be changed. That's what this is all about. And this is Bill C27, the Financial Transparency Act. But it's almost like you need to start doing a whole review of other pieces of legislation in Canada. You know, from Bill C38 to Bill C45 to Bill C51. It's almost like you need a whole federal law review to get laws changed, to get them in line with Canada's own constitution, which recognizes existing Aboriginal treaty rights. So being here today on behalf of our Assembly First Nations, we're demonstrating that support because it really has to be able to change. And here, when we start talking about Bill C27, and you heard very clearly, the chiefs are accountable to their membership first and foremost. That's where the obligation lies. There's no issue with transparency and accountability from a First Nations perspective. They're accountable to their membership. The issue becomes when it becomes public, you know, especially when you start talking about own source revenues. You know, when you start doing consolidation of audits, and you have businesses and companies where there are no federal monies at all, you still have to account for that in the consolidation. So there's issues of privacy, confidentiality, you know, so that's the whole point as well that people need to get their heads around. So when Chief Fox makes a point about everybody else is protected by privacy legislation, well, not First Nations people, and that's a prime example of that. Because again, audits have even been proven, financial audits are confidential information. In 1988, the Montana case, you know, so they're confidential. But when you publicly disclose them, where's the privacy? Where's the confidentiality in that? The other key point, and I'm very pleased to be here to listen in and to see some of the points being made, because we have a relationship with the Crown relationship. And it's almost like now in Canada, you got 634 First Nations, and a lot of them, we survive from these things called contribution agreements. Contribution agreements that aren't based on any kind of a relationship with the Crown. They're based on the Indian Act and the Financial Administration Act. You're not in this relationship high up. And that's the flawed process. There has to be a new fiscal relationship with the Crown. That has to be put in place. Because the relationship that's been in place for the past 20 years, again, we've constantly said that these agreements that are in place don't keep up with inflation, don't keep up with the rising population in the communities. And so this gap that I keep talking about is growing and growing and growing. And why we need a new fiscal relationship in this country, that gap is not good for First Nations people, it's not good for Canada. And the gap I talk about, Canada, according to the United Nations Human Development Index, is rated 6th, very rich country, high up. You apply the same indices to Indigenous peoples, we're 63rd. 6th versus 63rd. And so that gap represents the overcrowded housing in our communities. That gap represents the cap on education and training. That gap represents the violence and the 1,200 missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. That gap represents the high numbers of children in provincial care. That gap represents the high youth suicides. That gap represents a disproportionate number of First Nations people in the justice system. And that gap is not good. And so one way of dealing with that gap to close it is to start looking at a new fiscal relationship with the Crown. And that's what this is all about as well. And it's really timely that this is here, so I salute the chiefs for the work they're doing legally, because you have an election coming up, October 19th. You know, so change could be flowing across this country, and this legislation, this whole, not only Bill C27, the other pieces of legislation that I referred to aren't in line with Canada's own constitution, Section 35. There's been no consultation nor consent, and it surely impacts on inherent rights, and it surely impacts on Section 35 rights. So again, those are the points I wanted to make in terms of being here, and it's just, again, we're here to support the leadership and what they're doing. You always devise 3 strategies, you know, a legal strategy, a political strategy, and an on-the-ground activist strategy at times in order to bring about change. And this is part of the legal strategy that's ongoing. So with that, from our AFN, I congratulate and salute the leadership that's here. Our Assembly of First Nations, we're here to support. Again, we always make out points that AFN, FSI, we're not rights and title holders. It's the rights and title holders that are here. They're speaking, but we're here to support them. So with that, I'll say that much, and écoutez, que más continue.
Now we'll have some questions from the media.
So Megan Craig, Global News, I just had a question. What is your reaction to the Crown arguing that First Nations can tailor their financial statements, but not give away any sensitive information that you don't want to disclose?
The Crown? Well, basically, in the legislation is about transparency and accountability. So what does that tell you in court? Are they sending mixed messages? Are they saying to us, you don't have to provide this, but you can do some things with this book? I don't agree with what they're saying. I said earlier in my statement, we are transparent, we are accountable already. And they've indicated that, their expert witnesses said that, their affidavit have said that. You've heard the Crown say that. So where are they coming from with that? Your guess is as good as mine.
Chief Betty Ann Adam from the Star Phoenix, if you continue to, are you saying then that you will not provide the consolidated statements that they're saying that are aggregated and that provide no meaningful information to your competitors? They're saying that you could provide statements that don't have any meaningful information. And are you saying that you're not prepared to give that kind of statement?
Onion Lake is prepared to provide the consolidated audit, subject to confidentiality, as it has always been. We provided those consolidated audits before C27 to Indian Affairs, and it stayed there. It was accessible to every one of our members through Indian Affairs or through Chief and Council. So all those consolidated audits, as you've heard in the court, we're prepared to provide them. We just don't want them to be on the internet for the world to see in New Zealand, or Australia, or Germany, or United States. That's the difference.
So but what their accountants are saying, that you could change the way you deliver your accounting so that nobody actually knows what's in it. Are you willing to provide that sort of, I know that your lawyers had asked the accountant about whether they were, isn't that like hiding information? And they're saying, like.
We have not done what the Crown is suggesting, and we are not going to. We are going to provide that information to our people and our membership, as it always has been.
So you'll continue to be transparent that way, and so does that mean that you're going to continue to give it that way, and then the world will see your private information?
I answered it this way. We're prepared, status quo, to provide the information, consolidated audits to Indian Affairs if they do not post it on the website, as it always has been.
Another thing that the lawyers for the Crown are arguing today is that Onion Lake didn't really prove that having that withholding the money would actually harm the people of Onion Lake. Can you comment on that?
Hang on, I'm going to get Sharon to comment.
Okay, sorry to butt in on the chief's statement here. I think the question that you were asking about was the financial, Mr. Mack's presentation, and also that the Crown went on and on about the PSA and the GAP, the General Accounting Principles. The problem is that the fans are not following GAP or the PSA. What happens is that there's a reporting handbook that is put out by Union Affairs that is amended on a yearly basis without the consent of the bands, and in the reporting handbook is where the First Nations have to account for all their businesses, all their deficits, all their income, whatever source it is, all the programs and services they deliver. That is reported in the consolidated audit. And they're trying to sidetrack the discussion by talking about the PSA and the GAP. That is not correct, because if the bands are only having to report on the GAP, or the PSA, there wouldn't be a problem. It's the way that the handbook is constructed, which is more than 250 pages of how they have to report. If you look at that, how much detail that the bands have to provide to the government, that's what the government wants to publish. And that's what the bands are concerned about, because once that sort of genie is out of the bottle, there's no way to put it back in. And so all of the business, and that's what Onion Lake is saying, that's what Sawridge is saying, that they're saying that once your business materials are put out there, then they were open to inspection by everybody. Now, you know, they went on and on this afternoon about the Sawridge, you know, didn't give their auditor, the person that did their, I'm not going to talk about Sawridge too much, but the thing is that he didn't talk about is that Sawridge has a financial act that was passed by their membership that says what the details are. He doesn't need to see their audits in order to know what they give to their membership. So they're playing kind of fast and loose with these concepts, and people need to know there's a reporting handbook, and that this is the guiding principle for everybody that enters into a contribution agreement with the Department of Indian Affairs. And that's one that's done unilaterally without the consent of the bands also. That's another issue. But just going to what about the harm, they were saying in the court that Onion Lake should have provided to the the 15 people that were not going to get a house under the ministerial guarantee. Well, Onion Lake was not prepared to provide names of those 15 families because it's confidential and private to Onion Lake. And why should Onion Lake put that in the court when they had already had to have the records sealed in relation to some other material that the Crown was trying to release behind the back of Onion Lake? So I think that you have to be very careful about what you report in relation to what the Crown is saying, because they're trying to promote the idea that there was no harm being done to Onion Lake. But as long as they hold on to the ministerial loan guarantee from CMHC and they don't let it go, then 15 families in Onion Lake who are the most needy, the ones that deserve to have housing, don't get the house. And they're saying, well, you know, Onion Lake had the option because Anna Fontaine wrote a letter saying Onion Lake had the option. They could have went and used their capital monies. The problem is using the capital monies is they got to go to the bank and they get a loan at the bank's interest that doesn't allow for people on social assistance to qualify. So, you know, they're playing around with the wording, and they're trying to get the judge off the idea that there was harm being done and continues to be done to Onion Lake. So that's, I'm sorry, Chief, I just wanted to make that clear. Because, it is a very complex issue. Most people don't understand what First Nations have to go through in these reporting, and their so-called expert, Mr. Mack, didn't even have before him the Indian Affairs Reporting Handbook. The Department of Justice did not give it to him in his preparation of his report. So he's making a report on Indians and this legislation. He doesn't even have the handbook. He wasn't even given it to him to review. So what kind of expert evidence is that? So, you know, I'm sorry I interrupted you, Chief, but I just heard that at the back of the room.
Chief, I've got a question about business information. What kind of information would create harm to your band and competitors? And
If we disclose Company A in terms of the financial statements, as an example, if Company A posted it on international web and the financial statements are there, yet they're saying, the Crown is saying different. But if we did the consolidated audit as we've done, there would be a breakdown of Company A in terms of expenses, revenue as all audits. And over here would be a cash balance. And over here would be the assets and liabilities. And if our community, our business, we're going to go compete outside the community and bid, well, all these competitors have to look at an Onion Lake statement. Boom, they have X number of dollars. They can only bid up to here, or they can't afford to bid this low. So that's an example of the competitor disadvantage that we would have, because they're saying, basically you heard what the Crown is saying. You don't have to disclose all that. Well, we're not like that. Our people, we disclose the consolidated audit, our auditors, we give it to all our people. And if they ask questions line by line on that business, we have annual general meetings on our businesses, and this is where the information questions are. So to answer your question, that is an example. Or if we were going to bid on a construction equipment, and then our competitors are sitting there and they'll Google it, oh, this company only has this much cash flow. They can't afford it. So they can outbid us on capital purchases or land or whatever it may be out there in the business world.
Now, who's to say that a band member who sees this information, copies it, and then sells it to a competitor?
That has never happened in our community, so I can't answer that.
Last week, News Talk Radio, we had heard briefly in regards to our arguments made that there had been harm because of the withholding of the non-essential funds. Can you talk about if there has been any harm and specific examples thereof?
Again, the non-essential funding in our council, along with our staff and in our internal operations, if we did not, an example are those benefits that they're withholding, as mentioned in court. If we did not find internally our own resources, do you think as a teacher you would stick around and undertake an education if you didn't get the same benefits as you're entitled to anywhere else because the nation could not afford it? So we looked at a very, very difficult case in deliberation. At the end of the day, where is the harm? It's the child that is not getting the quality of education from that teacher or staff, that the best staff that we can get for our young people. That's an example. So we've had to, while we're going through this whole exercise, what we've done today in court, we've had to accommodate and try and assist those young people and those children in the education system. We have one of the biggest systems on Indian reserves in Canada, where there's 1,400 plus nursery to grade 12 going to school on Onion Lake Reserve. So we have to look at those youth and do that. Now, on the flip side, if we didn't do that, then at year end, we'd be in a deficit. So it's basically catch-22, you see what I mean? If we didn't do it over here, we'd have a problem in the financial year end. There'd be a deficit or the staff would leave.
Okay, so just to clarify, you said that you've had to cut funds then to education on the reserve then?
If we didn't,
With the withholding of these funds right now?
those benefits that they withheld, we've had to internally supplement those while we're going here in court. So the children are not being harmed. If we didn't have that, like many, as Chief Bellegarde said, many First Nations across Canada, they would have no choice but perhaps to realign the education as an example of their staff.
So should the withdrawal, or should the withholding continue, then you would run a deficit because you're pulling from your own funds, right?
Yes,
Okay.
if we didn't have additional resources.
Did you take that money from other programming?
Not Indian Affairs money, our own source revenue.
If we can go back again to the disclosure and so the government accountants are saying, if you give these highly aggregated financial statements that do not reveal any meaningful information, then the government of Canada will be satisfied. And you're saying, but we give our people lots of information. And they're saying, well, if you want to give your people lots of information, then you can give them a special report. And so would that mean that the First Nations would have to pay the accountants more money to create more reports in order to satisfy treating their own people only after they've satisfied the federal government's act?
I would have to answer yes, it would cost more to the nation, not to the individual people, if we were to do that. If, I emphasize that. As I said earlier, we're not about to be cooking or doctoring any books. And I emphasize that not.
I have a question for Mr. Pellegrin. Maybe if you could actually stand at the mic though, sorry. Just
Sure.
we can capture the audio. I'm Sarah Plowman with CTV News. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, they lobbied for this legislation. And they tell us, obviously there's more than 600 First Nations, but they say that they still hear from First Nations members on a regular basis that they're not getting answers to basic questions about what's happening with the money that's being handled by their leadership. And they say that First Nations people deserve accountability, and that's what they think that this act is all about. I'd like to hear from you, your response to that.
I would think, we hear that all the time, but I think, as Chief Fox indicated, and I've been a chief and a councillor of Little Black Bear as well, and we have band meetings. You're open, accountable, and transparent. You show your membership everything. That's what's done at the community level. But in every community, just like in every province, every territory, every riding, you have political opposition. So if people don't get the answers that they want sometimes, they're going to be the ones complaining. So maybe that's who the Canadian taxpayers are listening to, the Canadian Taxpayers Organization is listening to. And I think they have to look at it on a bigger sense, if that's what they're responding to. Again, there's no problem with transparency and openness and accountability. Chief Fox is clear. And our chiefs have no problem with that, being accountable first and foremost to our membership, on and off reserve. So if that's where they're coming from with that statement, they're a little bit misguided. They don't have all the information. And the point that I was really pleased to hear about here as well within this dialogue is that the monies that come out to First Nations people, again, don't come from the taxpayers. That's always been taught to us. It's not taxpayers' dollars that come out to First Nations people. They're Indian monies. And look at all the land and resources. I drove from Treaty 4 territory down in Regina all the way up to Treaty 6 territory. In Treaty 4 territory, there's 75,000 square miles that's being shared. In Treaty 6 territory, there's 125,000 square miles. And so the resources that come out to Indigenous peoples is because of the relationship with the Crown. And it's not to come from taxpayers' dollars, right? And so that's the point that we got to keep stressing to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as well. They've got to get their heads around that point. Because if it was not for the land and resource wealth the Indigenous peoples are sharing, how much billions upon billions have been generated from land and resource wealth to the GDP of this country? And so these Indian monies, that's a very key point that came out in this trial. I would urge the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to get their heads on that.
Because they actually did say in our interview that, I'm quoting here, I just want you to hear it, it's important for taxpayers because they're the ones who are footing the bill.
Again, I just respectfully, it's not the taxpayers footing the bill. When you look at the Indigenous peoples, and you look at all the land that we've shared, 99.8% of the land is taken up by non-Indigenous peoples. Our 634 reservations are 0.02% on land. When we start talking about reconciliation and closing the gap, we got to look at the whole relationship we have to the land and to the economy and to the resources. And that's something I want to keep pointing out to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.
If
Thank you.
the money does then not come from taxpayers, federal government does not accrue money through
They get
very
resources.
many other means. And
They
it's
get
not-
royalties. They get everything
Okay, so
from
you're talking-
businesses.
okay, so you're talking about
yes.
royalties.
Yeah, we have to start breaking down
That's
the
where you
federal
have
budget.
to put, because I was kind of confused and I'm thinking we collect tax dollars, that's
Oh, yeah.
where government gets its money from, is tax.
Well, it's tax, but there's also the royalties. Remember, think of it in the global sense of GDP, gross domestic product. Just track the money. How much, even from when companies develop the land and resources, they pay tax to provincial governments, they pay tax, corporate tax to the federal government, but it's all generated from the land and resource wealth. Well, where did the governments and the industry get the land and resource wealth from? Indigenous peoples. So that's what I mean by Indian monies.
Thank you.
It was it.